Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claudia Simone Dorchain. I'm a PhD in philosophy from Germany, and I would like to welcome you to my philosophical channel Philosophie-Direkt here on YouTube. Topic of the month of August is actually philosophy in China or Chinese philosophy. But I have promised to my English-speaking audience to translate topic of the month of June, which was philosophers as psychologists, in English. Here we are. I will keep my promise. First of all, I have to apologize for my English. I'm a German native speaker and English is actually my third foreign language and therefore naturally not my strongest part, but I hope that we will understand each other. Back to topic. Philosophers as psychologists. What do philosophers have to say about human psychology? And do philosophers offer maybe a broader or more holistic point of view? In my opinion, this is truly the case. Philosophy dates back in the European tradition thousands of years and does offer a very general and holistic insight on human psychology as such, human behavior, human values, questions of perception, of logic, and so on. While psychology is a very modern, one may say postmodern science, and thus very specialized. It deals with empirical studies such as social studies, sociological studies, clinical studies, behavioral studies, and neurosciences. All these specialized studies are very valuable because they may contribute to our common knowledge of how mankind and each individual person functions on a certain level. But philosophy offers a deeper and more intense and more general insight. In my opinion, philosophy and psychology go very well together, and therefore it might be of great use to compare what classic philosophers do have to say about human psychology as such with our present up-to-date state of research in psychology. Therefore, I have chosen 4 philosophers who dealt with human psychology in a very abstract and holistic way and compared it to modern-day psychological science. First of all, we do have Meister Eckhart, a mystical philosopher of the 13th, 14th century, who has already addressed the problem of anxiety and fear of loss. We will say whether Meister Eckhart's approach may be of a certain actuality even today. Secondly, I have chosen a nearly contemporary of Meister Eckhart, a mystical philosopher also who lived a little later, John Tauler. And he had to say something about crisis as chance. And we will say whether this oftenly heard notion of crisis as chance by Tauler does have something to do with our modern grasp of the topic, or whether it is something essentially different. Then we will make a big jump in history. From the Middle Ages to the 19th century, 2 19th century philosophers who also addressed problems of psychology, Friedrich Nietzsche and Arthur Schopenhauer. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about dysfunctional families and dysfunctional marriages. We will see whether and in what far his insights on dysfunctional family are in tune with what we today consider as such or describe as such, and in what far Friedrich Nietzsche's insight may be valuable today. And the fourth philosopher I would like to have a deeper look on is Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer dealt with the problem of trauma, psychotrauma, traumatizing events, and how to cope with them. And he has found out a certain coping strategy, and we will see whether this is in accordance with modern day psychology. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was a very short introduction into what we will discuss now for German-speaking philosophers on topics of human psychology. First of all, we will start with Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart was a mystical philosopher and theological philosopher of the 14th, 13th century. He lived exactly from 1260 to 1327 or 28. And he was famous for his sharp and very intelligent theological discussions. He was the successor of Thomas Aquinas at the chair of philosophy on the Sorbonne in Paris, and he was also known as a so-called Lebemeister. This means a philosophical counselor. Maybe our current practice of philosophical counseling started back then in the Middle Ages, when philosophy was first used in order to give advice to people who are in distress. Meister Eckhart has given philosophical counsel to a queen of his time and day, Queen Agnes of Hungary. She has become a widow because of the political assassination of her husband and was looking for divine consolation and philosophical counsel. And Meister Eckhart was on his diplomatic mission to Agnes of Hungary in order to give her philosophical and theological advice. And the resume of his philosophical advice is today available in the form of the so-called Book of Divine Consolation, in German das Buch der göttlichen Troestung. Divine Consolation, what does this mean? Or how can we possibly imagine Meister Eckhart, a renowned scholar from Germany, giving advice to a young widow who is actually in fear of life threats at her own court? This is not an abstract question. Also, Eckhart was a master of abstract theological discussions. This is very practical, and he actually gives very practical advice to this Queen of Hungary. He says, in short, you have lost something. You do not need compassion, you need a different mindset. This is quite astonishing, but in fact, Meister Eckhart's approach on giving consolation is very cognitive. He gives the advice that this queen, his client, should think in a different way about her loss of her husband, her loss of political and financial security. His advice is formed in the logical argumentation as follows. Fear of anxiety, or anxiety and fear of loss more precisely, is something human, all too human. All people fear to lose something and to feel miserable and insecure. But in his opinion, loss is a logical consequence of a delusion. It is the delusion of possession. People do live in anxiety and fear of loss because they live in the delusion or illusion of owning something, of possessing something, of owning this house, this partner, this car, or maybe, in the case of his famous client, this kingdom. Actually, Eckhart reminds his client that she does not own anything and that nobody does own anything. Loss is the result of being human, and thus is having everything on loan. We do not own anything. This is but an illusion. We are in a perpetual course of losing something because we do essentially not owning anything, not even our own life, not even our own bodies. This is actually a very spiritual and mystical idea which Meister Eckhart introduced here in order to give consolation, but it is of great practical value because modern day science has shown that anxiety and fear of loss can actually be treated by creating a different mindset and having a different mindset on so-called possessions and things we pretend to own. Everything is on loan, the mystical philosopher concludes. Isn't that true? I do think so. In the Middle Ages as well as today.